freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Thanks, Nighthawk. Guess what? You're back with David Mackey's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, the number one listener-supported talk radio on the internet. Go there, go to revolution.radio and push the donate button right now, telling you to do it. Subscribe to the archives, they're free. Subscribe to Shiny Side Out's YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so you can be updated when we release a new video, when it's actually after we do a new show. Get yourself some merchandise from the station's website. That's what you need to do. T-shirts, mugs, anything you like, whatever there's an area you can buy. And that's another way to support the station. We're going to thank you very much, though, for listening to Revolution Radio. And Shiny Side Out, David Mackey in particular, because we do this for free.
Gratis.
Yes. So, at one time, I think this is 11th year. This is show 584. Pause for Mackey.
Why? No, look, 480 and 500.
Correct.
A lot of information. Look. And the truth is, this, guys, with this show, and we always try to present the entirety of the facts, even if they disagree with what we believe, which is fine, of course. That's what you should do. But we also look at stuff in detail. We follow up, and this we're doing again because there were some follow-up things which we're talking about right now. So new documents have come to light that seem to indicate very strongly that Kamla and others were in fact taken in by the Allies, as well as I'm going to put together a timeline, Dave, around this whole thing to look at the potential movements of the bell as well. Because we have information from a lot of disparate sources now that can trace the movements of one of the items of equipment, and we think it's the bell across the globe down south. I think it's going to be interesting. But where are we up to exactly? I've got a mark here, but I'm not sure if it's correct.
Yeah, good luck with that. I say that because I can't find the show notes.
Oh, should I send it to you?
Oh, again, that'd be fantastic.
Why don't I do that? Let's do that. In the meantime, though, just as a quick recap, we are looking at a number of different documents and reports, as well as news articles, that have shown, it seems, that there are a number of different, what's the best word? Views as to Kamla's whereabouts, as well as whether or not he was in fact killed at all. And there are 5 separate accounts of his death. So that puts into question all of the witnesses' statements. Because if 5 people had reported his death separately, then well, at least 4 need to be wrong, right? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But look, I think where we are, in fact, is let's go a little bit further. Okay, let's start at enigmatic final rights, which is on page 67 of the document I've just sent through. Enigmatic final rights. In fact, Kamla did not hide but moved with his staff on April 28, 1945 to Ebensee. The focal point was the Villa Mendelssohn, which had been seized by the construction management of SS Special Inspection 4 in the fall of 1943. The villa was the former summer residence of the widely ramified Mendelssohn Bartholdy family. On the night of May 3 to 4, 1945, Kamla then gave the order to depart for Prague. His subordinates were reportedly appalled, given that this would amount to a suicide mission. Shortly before departure, Kamla handed over a letter for his wife Jutta to Arthur Struck, who was not supposed to accompany him. The letter did not testify to an unconditional adherence to the rule of the law until its demise, but rather to its will to survive. I do not think, and I'm quoting from the letter now, I do not think of putting a stop to all the people entrusted to me by sneaking out of my life in a cowardly way, he said. To what extent these lines signaled an escape plan to which only his wife Jutta was privy remains an open question. In any case, the reports of Kammler's subordinates agree to the extent that Kammler gave the departure order around 4 a.m. Kammler's second driver, Kurt Preuk, recorded the route in a map and marked important stations. Accordingly, the column initially drove towards Linz. Interestingly, though, the route marked in the map ends near Freistadt, not far from Linz. On the way to Prague, as reported by Kammler's housekeeper Gertrud Timme, who had also fled from Berlin to Ebensee and joined the convoy, they had lost sight of each other. Karl Otto Sauer, Secretary of State in the Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production, also mentioned Linz as interim station of the Kammler staff on the way to Prague during an interrogation. Yet another testimony indicates that Kammler separated from the rest of the group. Frieda Willer, a neighbor of the Kammlers in Berlin-Grunewald, reported on a conversation that she had in 1947 with the daughter of Kammler's first driver, Friedrich Baum. Baum's daughter said that her father was wounded while fleeing to Bavaria and died as a result of his injury. This statement corresponds to the autopsy report by Friedrich Baum. According to the report, Baum was wounded on May 4th and died of blood poisoning on May 29th, 1945 in the Spa and Park Hotel Cumberland in Gemünden, which was converted into a hospital at the time. If Friedrich Baum chauffeured his supervisor Kammler and they were separated from the rest of the group, they cannot have gone far beyond Linz, stands to reason. Everything that was later reported in testimony under oath by Kammler's subordinates, SS Obersturmbannführer Heinz Zeuner and SS Oberscharführer Kurt Preuk, as well as testimonies of other contemporary witnesses about the events of May 1949 and about Kammler's alleged suicide, is questionable. They are fictitious narratives that contradict each other in decisive details. They only serve the purpose of obscuring the actual events and supporting the pension claims of Jutta Kammler, for which her husband had to be officially declared deceased. Kammler's office manager, Heinz Schürmann, who had remained in Ebensee at his boss's orders, reported on a last conversation in which Kammler had made it known that he would not allow any documents to get into the hands of the Americans. In Schürmann's view, Kammler had wanted to join the Russians. Dave?
Similar claims were also made by SS Gruppenführers Gottlob? Yep, Gottlob Berger, head of the SS main office, on Hitler's orders at their last meeting in the Reich Chancellery on April 22nd to 23rd of 1945. Berger was appointed SS Commander South. He set up his command post in Kirchdorf near St. Johann in Tyrol. That Berger had retreated there was known to the Allies, according to the attaché of the Swiss legation, W. Buchmuller, who visited Berger on the 4th of May 1945 in order to settle with him the procedure for the transfer of prominent Allied prisoners to US troops, which had reached Innsbruck. Berger stayed in a house trailer. He also had a radio car at his disposal. Peter Feldscher, the head of the section for foreign interests of Switzerland at the Swiss embassy in Berlin, oversaw the handover of the prisoners. Berger said in December 1946 about the events between May 5th to 7th, 1945, in order for these files about the prisoner of war to be properly handed over, May 5th, I made contact with the help of the 13th SS Corps with the American division closest to me, the 101st Airborne Division under Lieutenant General Wöhler. It then came to a meeting on the 5th of May in Meitschbach. On the May 7th, an American lieutenant colonel came to me. I was then near Kirchdorf in Tyrol, and said that the transfer will take place in Berchtesgaden or Garden, and that I could return to my place after the transfer. I went to Berchtesgaden, came to the hotel, the Berchtesgaden Hof, and waited there, then was detained. The next day, the Chief of Staff, May 8th, by the way, came to there. We were then taken to Augsburg, as the transfer would take place there. I had with me, in a reddish-brown large leather bag, all the handover notes, important secret orders, Adolf Hitler's order about my assignment, which I had received in the early morning hours of April 23rd. We arrived at Augsburg at 3 o'clock in the morning on May 9th. Berger, who therefore had been in direct contact with US military forces on the 5th of May and 7th, 1945, did not comment on the events in his 1946 interrogations, which, according to his later submissions, took place on the 6th, 1945. What reason had he not to mention them until 1945 is still unclear. In this May 6th, 1945, the day of the surrender of the army group Hans Kammler had appeared at his place in Kirchdorf, according to Berger. The SS general had driven up in a 6-cylinder BMW passenger car. He supposedly had carried microfilms and photocopies in a metal case. As Berger further explained, Kammler had driven on in the direction of Bad Gastein and was led by a Russian through the lines. Why Berger believed that Kammler had defected to the Russians is not clear from the CIA files. Is Berger's story of the meeting with Kammler plausible? In order to get to the Soviet lines from Ebensee, Kammler would have had to drive towards Bohemia, not to Tyrol. Could in any event Kammler still get to Gertsdorf on May 6th without getting noticed? The nearby town, St. Johann, was already occupied by US troops. There, Colonel James H. Critchfield, commander of a rapid task force, the 2nd Battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment of the 36th US Infantry Division, had discussed the details of the ceasefire with headquarters of the 1st German Army. Even more mysterious is Kammler's last trip given a radio message he sent on the 7th of May, 1945. Becky. Hello?
It would help if I come off mute.
There
Kammler
he is.
transmits to Leitmeritz. The Kammler staff was on their way to Prague and, according to the eyewitnesses, found itself in the midst of the uprising of the Prague population against the German occupiers. The remaining Waffen-SS forces in Leitmeritz came under distress no later than May 7, 1945. This is evidenced by the radio messages decrypted by the British that were addressed to the local Waffen-SS signal school, or sent from there. On May 7, 1945, the following radio message was intercepted and translated. Signed, Kammler, SS Obergruppenführer. 2 signals. School Leitmeritz on 7/5. Request immediate assurance from SS Sturmbannführer Kraft, SS Obstab Leitmeritz, that immediate report of arrival of Kammler will be rendered. Kammler receives the answer the next day. Signed Kraft, 2S Obergruppenführer Kammler and GOC Prague on 8/5, May 5th, that is. Stab Kammler has not yet arrived by 6:30 on the 7th of the 5th. The recipient of the radio message was SS Sturmbannführer Alfons Kraft, chief of the SS leadership staff B5 in Leitmeritz since November 1944. The unit was based in Lobositz and was responsible for the development of 3 underground limestone caves in Leitmeritz, codenamed Richard 1, 2, and 3. Originally, the facilities had been intended for the relocation of the tank engine production line of Auto Union in Chemnitz. Later, the Armaments Ministry had given Richard 2 to the Berlin company Osram for production of tungsten wires needed for electrical equipment. While the expansion of the cave complexes remained unfinished, the companies had begun various productions in November 1944. British intelligence suspected that Leitmeritz was used for production of components for the V3. That's the V3 rocket. For what reason Kammler sent his staff to Leitmeritz remains unclear. His last radio message, if he did not send this after being captured, which cannot be completely ruled out, suggests that he was not aware of the specific military situation in Prague, nor that in Leitmeritz. They were still fighting in Prague on May 7, and in Leitmeritz the SS had already dissolved the concentration camp. On May 5, 1945, the release of those prisoners who had survived the camps began. His last radio message leaves no doubt that Kammler had separated from his staff. But from where did he transmit this message? Could he still use Berger's radio car on May 7, or did he send the message from somewhere near Linz? So far, this remains unclear. However, the events unfolded, Kammler, we can now state definitively, fell into the hands of the American forces, which brings us to the new documents. And this, Dave, is really why we are reading this whole thing. Go ahead, my friend.
New documents prove the capture of Kammler. The first document is dated May 30, 1945. It was written by Colonel Lloyd K. Pepple, who worked at the headquarters of the US Strategic Air Force in Europe. In the document, Pepple provided an overview of the most interesting spoils of war for the US Air Force. The most important types of German aircraft, missiles, helicopters, guided bombs, engines, instruments, radars, etc., captured by the American forces are listed. They are followed by the names of the prisoners of war, scientists, engineers, and technicians who played important roles in the new ballistic weapon developments, all of whom were slated for continued interrogation. Finally, non-technical personnel, mostly senior officers with specialized knowledge in the field of aircraft and or missile development, are also named. The following is a list of key German Air Force non-technical personnel presently held for interrogation. At the very top of this 34 names list are Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, Field Marshal Erhard Milch, General Kohler, and Dr. Albert Speer. The 4 men were in American custody at the time, as were all others. The 18th name on the list is SS Obergruppenführer Kammler, Inspector of all jet fighter units of the Luftwaffe. Listed in front of Kammler is General Kammhuber, followed by Colonel General Weiss. It's Janet Weiss. Kammler's name is followed by General Bodenschatz. It is well documented that by the middle of May 1945, Kammhuber and Weiss were prisoners of war. Why are they to be considered? Both directly reported to Luftwaffe Commander-in-Chief and Reich Minister Göring during the final stages of the war, Kammhuber being the Special Commissioner for Defense against four-engine bombers, and Weiss as Special Commissioner for Defense against enemy long-range weapons. As the General Plenipotentiary for jet aeroplanes since March 29th, 1945, Kammhuber was also in charge of Kamla. However, with the approval of Speer and Göring, the latter had been appointed inspector for all rocket-propelled weapons 2 days earlier. It is noteworthy that, in an American review on July 10th, 1945, of the organizational structure of the German Air Force in the final stages of the war, Kammhuber, Wise, and Kamla are mentioned in the same order as in the document of May 30th, 1945. They did not belong to the group of people whose names had been marked underlining the officers whose names are underlined are either held at Berchtesgaden or are on loan in the UK. Further on, the document emphasizes it is hoped that all remaining personnel will later be available for interrogation. This means that all three were still in the large US Air Force prisoner pool in Europe on May 30th, but were then interned elsewhere. Remember that. In the case of Kammhuber and Weiss, it is certain that they were in the United States until 1947 and 48 respectively. For Kamla, we have to draw on additional circumstantial evidence. Meki.
Sorry, just a quick one before we continue. So let's assume that Kamla had in fact been taken or had surrendered to the Allies, to the Americans, right? All of a sudden, Operation High Jumps becomes a lot more plausible. So we do know that something was transported in a huge Junkers transport aircraft to Argentina. We know this, right?
Yeah.
That's documented evidence for that. We don't know where it went. I postulate here, and this is just me, that it went to Antarctica. You know, this is the shiny side, remember? And it went to Antarctica, right? And to do whatever. Now, Kamla is now in American custody. This is 1945. He's being interrogated. He probably has a whole bunch of information. He knew, without a doubt, because he was a great administrator, that the Bell, if that's what it was, had in fact been transported to Antarctica. And without much air gap between these events, the Americans, just at the closing of World War II, and remember, the war went on longer in the Pacific, right? I mean, it closed out as well in August of 1945, but it went on longer than the war in Europe. And without much air gap, as I said, they go ahead and organize Operation High Jump, right, in 1946. With you know, where everybody else would be more concerned about rebuilding rather than doing anything else. It was almost a year to the day of the end of hostilities in the Pacific, so August 26, 1946. And it would take that long to organize an expedition of this magnitude if they had started planning it in the middle of 1945, right? Or thereabouts. So it makes, Dave, I have to say, the timelines are making more and more sense for all of this. Because again, Kamla would have known about the bases.
That's correct.
If
them
there were any, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now let's get back to the document quickly. Yet another document suggests, though indirectly, Kamla's capture. It is a letter from Brigadier General George MacDonald to Major Ernst Englander. He was commissioned by the Chief of the Air Force Intelligence Service in Washington. MacDonald writes to collect information on various aspects of German underground works and installations. Project Riese, clearly. In the context of recent scientific developments, it was of paramount importance for future planning and of the highest priority that we obtain all the benefit of the experience of German industry regarding the use of such facilities. Now, just another quick pause here. So the Americans were extremely interested in the ability to move production of whatever underground and have bases underground, clearly in light of potential future hostilities with the Soviet Union, but maybe there were other reasons too. To prepare for this study, MacDonald commissioned Englander to make, and I'm quoting, the necessary arrangements to personally interrogate Speer, Kammler, and Sauer, Karl Sauer that is, and report your findings to me as soon as possible. You can't interrogate someone you don't have.
That's
why
true.
This is indirectly. Yeah, that's why they're saying it's sort of an indirect suggestion that he might have been captured. The recipient of the letter, Ernst Englander, was the chief interrogator of the Air Force Intelligence Service, who worked closely with the U.S. prosecutor for the Nuremberg trials, Robert Jackson. Englander was commissioned by MacDonald to ask specifically about underground installations while interrogating the three prisoners who knew best about it: Albert Speer, Hans Kammler, and Karl Otto Sauer. As Assistant Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force A2 Intelligence Service, MacDonald was responsible for tracking down the latest German weapons technology expertise, such as equipment, documents, and personnel. He was responsible for organizing the transfer of the captured weapons and equipment to the United States. He also oversaw the interrogations of the most important German scientists, technicians, and military officers. Between the end of the war and August 1945, MacDonald inspected 5 of the largest German underground manufacturing sites of particular interest to the Air Force, which were Gusen, St. Oggen, Retzipfel, and Ebensee in Austria, Kala and Rotenstein near Jena, Germany. What the Air Force was interested in with this special project regarding the German underground structures becomes clear from a report dated August 29, 1945, to the commanding general of USAFE, in which MacDonald talks about his impressions of visiting the underground facilities reported. It would be of the utmost importance to paralyze or destroy such installations in case of war. His recommendation: it is recommended that this paper be forwarded to headquarters Army Air Forces, with the idea of selecting targets of the above-mentioned types for secret experiment of rocket-propelled atomic bomb. To be clear, the highest officer of the United States Air Force in Europe commissioned the specialist for the interrogations of the military and economic elite of the Third Reich in November 1945 with the questioning of Kammler. Such an assignment could only be given with the knowledge that Kammler was in American custody. In our opinion, these are the authors of the article, the reports no longer leave any doubt that Hans Kammler was in American custody. Which department looked after him? Where he was taken, what he revealed about his knowledge and what happened to him later remains unknown due to a lack of declassified files. According to Richardson, Kammler is said to have taken his own life in the fall of 1947, but there's no evidence for that yet. The countless rumors of his suicide or his flight to the Soviet Union should have come in handy for the US services. However, it is also conceivable that they were purposefully set into the world to cover tracks. For years, Allied intelligence agencies continued the search for the war criminal Hans Kammler. The British Colonel C.M. Warburton directed several requests to his US authorities for the whereabouts of Kammler, but received no answer.
Summary. What is the explosive nature of this story? I mean, after all, numerous examples of war criminals being taken into custody by the intelligence services of the Allied powers are well known. Why was Kammler of such extraordinary interest to the American military? Why was he not put before the Nuremberg tribunal like Göring, Speer, and Milch? Who made the decision to disguise his capture? His knowledge of the latest rocket and aircraft types alone is unlikely to have been crucial to his special status. Kammler was not a rocket and aircraft developer, but a civil engineer. In addition, the occupation powers had already captured prototypes of most of the new weapons and were able to interview their developers or put them into their services. One answer was provided by British intelligence after the war. Kamler, SS Chief of New Weapons, probably including CW and BW. Who are they, Mackie?
Chemical and biological weapons.
Chemical and... Yeah, there you go. Well, no. His knowledge is probably only second-hand, but he knows what fields have been covered and where documents, stocks, and pilot plants are hidden. Some of these were secreted in the Russian zone. It would be dangerous for us if he revealed this to the Russians. He could also tell them which scientists in these fields are in the Russian zone. Skoda CEO Wilhelm Voss characterized Kamler as follows. He was the head of a staff of specialists who developed highly secret weapons and war equipment. Whereas up to recent date, each branch of the Wehrmacht and its competent authorities had their developments carried out separately. Kamler succeeded in his field a centralized command for all branches of the Wehrmacht. His field consisted mainly of V weapons, rocket apparatus, remote control, atomic energy, jet propulsion, and other similar subjects. In any case, Kamler's disappearance was a great advantage to the rocket developers around Werner von Braun. They were able to blame all crimes against concentration camp inmates and forced laborers related to the production and use of V weapons to the SS, presenting themselves as apolitical engineers. The biography of Hans Kamler must be corrected in a central point. It does not end on May 9th, 1945. What happened after that can only be clarified after the discovery or the release of relevant documents, as well as the interrogation records. Mackie.
Just quickly, Frank Durbert is a journalist, and Rainer Karlsch is a historian with the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich and Berlin. So these are the guys that have written this, and this was written for the Wilson Center. And you can find it there, www.wilsoncenter.org, publication, and then Hans Kamler, etc. Now, the latest article that we have here for you is from January 15, 2022, so just a little bit over than a year. It was written by Matt Lebowitz, and it's titled How Nazi Germany's Most Diabolical SS Officer Evaded Post-War Justice. This is a reference to a book here, The Hidden Nazi. The author of the book, Dean Reuter, asks whether SS General Hans Kamler, who oversaw the construction of death camps, exchanged V2 rocket secrets for freedom. One of Nazi Germany's top Holocaust perpetrators traded rocket-making secrets for freedom, according to an investigator who researched the post-war trail of SS General Hans Kamler for more than a decade. During the Third Reich, Kamler oversaw construction of the concentration camp system, including the killing facilities at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Later in the war, he took over Germany's secret weapons program, forcing tens of thousands of laborers to construct and live in underground factories. The Holocaust would not have been as efficient were it not for Kamler, said Dean Reuter, author of The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil, recently published in paperback. He was integral to the evolution of mass murder. For decades, it was assumed, Kamler died by suicide or was killed shortly after liberation in April 1945. Reuter's book, however, demonstrates that Kamler was delivered to US authorities by rocket scientist Werner von Braun, who feared Kamler's secrets and colleagues would fall into Russian hands. Kamler And the Americans created the deal wherein he gave them the rocket team and they erased his past, Reuter told the Times of Israel. As part of that deal, we covered up his death, and the world accepted that he died. And said Reuter, whose book was published in hardcover in 2019. Opening with the hypothesis that Kamler did not commit suicide but relocated to South America, Reuter examined records showing Kamler was questioned by top American investigators in November 1945. Although von Braun possessed scientific know-how, Kamler, as von Braun's direct superior, knew a lot more about stashed away personnel, supplies, and documents. Kamler's knowledge is probably only second-hand, but he knows what fields had been covered and where documents, stocks and power plants are hidden. Read the British intelligence report, which we just talked about. Some of these were in the Russian zone. It would be dangerous for us if he revealed this to the Russians. So this is the guy who actually did the research to find it all. Dave?
He was the most diabolical. Kamler began his Nazi career modestly, working on construction projects for the Air Ministry. Having joined the party in 1931, however, he was a rigid ideologue. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yay, phew. In 1934, Kamler wrote a treatise about the expansion of Germany eastward, where the population would need to be dominated by ethnic German colonists. Holding a doctorate in civil engineering, Kamler believed the subjugation would require the murder of 20 to 30 million people. To help bring the Holocaust to scale, Kamler shifted from traditional building projects to implementing the architecture of genocide. Specifically, he oversaw Auschwitz-Birkenau's transition into a death camp where 1 million Jews were murdered. While building the death camp next to the Birkenau, next to Auschwitz, Kamler, whose signature appears on preserved work orders, demonstrated stunning efficiency. For example, he decided to turn underground morgues into gas chambers, adding a small freight elevator to transport corpses up to the crematoria. No detail on Birkenau was too small for Kamler's input, from the size of prisoner barracks to perimeter fences. The SS officer was nicknamed Dust Cloud for his frequent visits to the camp and unforgiving pace. His work was carried everywhere and duplicated throughout the Reich, said Reuter. He was the most diabolical. Mackie.
After he transformed Auschwitz-Birkenau into the Reich's largest death camp, Kamler partnered with SS head Heinrich Himmler on the construction of secret weapons. Eventually, the so-called Vengeance 2, V2, rocket program became the crown jewel in Kamler's slave labor empire. The V2 rockets were massively important, said Reuter. They were so advanced, they did not look like they belonged to the World War II battlefield. At 46 feet long each, the V2 rockets built by Kamler's laborers reached 55 miles into the atmosphere of northern France and landed in London with terrifying explosions. Supersonic in speed, the rockets were churned out in massive quantities and could travel up to 300 miles. Fortunately for the Allies, Germany's V2 rockets were not ready for use until October 1944, 4 months after the D-Day invasion. The Nazi system prioritized too many disparate projects simultaneously, ensuring that relatively few of them took off. We knew the Germans were testing these rockets, said Reuter. If they had gotten these to the launch pads in time, we might have had a different outcome. The war. Dave? Somebody came in and cleaned the files.
As part of Operation Paperclip, US authorities sought to capture German technical experts to use in the space program. Beginning in 1945, an estimated 5,000 German scientists and technicians were brought to the US, including severely tainted men who were involved in the Holocaust and the use of slave labor, says Reuter. Despite the taint attached to the Nazi scientists, bringing rocket experts like Werner von Braun to the US was considered vital as tensions with the Soviet Union escalated. German scientists helped the US build an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, and eventually outpace Russia to land on the moon. Bullshit. And with his record of building death camps and operating slave labor, Kammler was never a candidate for rehabilitation in the US. Instead, believes Reuter, Kammler gave US forces what they wanted, and the former SS general was allowed to flee Germany along with notorious Ratline out of Europe, through which thousands of Nazi war criminals fled to Argentina and other countries, as documented in The Simpsons. It doesn't say that, that's my comment. Well, they do. They have Hitler living in Argentina. In addition to Reuter's hypothesis that Kammler fled to South America, there is also a possibility he was used as an intelligence asset in Europe, like Klaus Barbie, or the other people we used and shipped off, said Reuter, adding that not even Israel's Mossad or Simon Wiesenthal Center hunted for Kammler. Because he reported dead everywhere else, right? He was perfect. He had no identity. In 2012, the US Department of Justice responded to a request from Reuter to view records on Kammler by sending the author a set of highly redacted documents. 7 years later, before Hidden Nazi went to press, Reuter made another Freedom of Information Act request and was told that the government had no such records about Kammler. As one archivist said to me, says the author, it was like somebody came in and cleaned out the files, said Reuter.
Whoa. What?
No.
So, yeah. So, now, let's just recap what we've learned here, right? So, this, I think it is fairly safe to say that Kammler did not, in fact, die in the aftermath of World War II. I think that's a fair statement. What is nebulous, though, is to what value he had to the Allies. Yeah, sure, he knew about some stuff, but there were others who knew about stuff as well. He might have known the most, potentially, but this was not that critical to know about. And he was never expressly in charge of chemical or biological weapons. It just wasn't part of his portfolio. It might have been, but I think that's a red herring, to be honest with you. Now, they had von Braun, they had the others, Dave, right? They had the high Nazis, they had Himmler and Goering and all that in custody. Speer as well. But Kammler, they didn't have. Or, sorry, they didn't say they had. And none, and you know, you're quite right. I mean, the Mossad and Simon Wiesenthal made it his life's work to hunt Nazis. That's what he did, right? That was his life's work, and there was a whole organization he built up himself. And the Mossad, of course, being the Israeli Secret Service, they also didn't go after Kammler. Now you have to ask yourself, why is that? They had the rocket scientists and engineers, 5,000 of them. Right? Now, they built rockets and ICBMs and moon rockets, most of which failed, but then eventually got it right. Not in 1969, they didn't, but that's neither here nor there. But eventually they got it right, and they sent people out into space. But Kammler is still not acknowledged as having been around. There's indicative evidence that he might have been, indirect evidence as well. There's some confessions that came from deathbeds of former CIA handlers that he was part of the United States program, as it were. Others say that he was allowed to go to Argentina, etc., etc. Now, but the question still remains: what was his value? If you compare the monstrous crimes he was responsible for and enabled, because he enabled the efficient genocide that Germany became famous for. Right? I mean, think about this. I mean, how do I get to kill more people and then dispose of the bodies? How do I make that more efficient? It takes a very singular mind to grapple with that problem. And he wrote a paper, as Dave read out earlier, in his early career, that would talk about German expansion into the East. Well, in order to do that, we really have to kill 20 or 30 million people that live there already. Like, you're building a bridge and we have to, cut down a couple of trees. It's like, what? What? This is a mind that is not disturbed. That's the wrong word. But detached, I think, in many ways, from what it means to be human. Not that I'm any shining light in that respect. But, so what was this value? What a coup it would have been for the Israelis or Simon Wiesenthal or anyone, for the matter, to get Kammler and say, here is the architect who actually built the concentration camps. He made it more efficient. He was responsible directly for thousands of deaths in underground work camps. Yes, this is the guy. That would have been, politically speaking, a major coup.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he was the guy that was placed in charge of all of Hitler's wonder weapons or secret weapons program. All of them. To get that guy? So I don't think this is about rockets at all. I want to say it's got nothing to do with rockets or V1s, 2s, or 3s. I don't think it has to do with anything we know about Kammler's value. I do believe after all, we've got 102 pages here, Dave, of stuff. 102 pages for these show notes, and we're up to page 76. The rest are notes and so forth, but and references. But so we got about 30 pages of references for this.
That's right.
but the point, and I've got a German section as well, which
that you'll be reading.
No. I just want to see if it coincides with the English versions. You know what I mean?
Oh yes, of course. The Winners write the history. Yeah.
Because I've got the German diary extracts. I want to see if the German, because I read German, obviously. I want to see if the translations were correct. But that's neither here nor there. That's work for me to do going forward. But the point I'm trying to make is this: he must have known other stuff, and we know the bell was being tested there. The bell is a thing, right? Now we don't know what or how. We don't know what they were doing in that massive underground facility, which had the code name, Project Giant. We don't know because the tunnels have collapsed. We don't even know how big it is because some of those tunnels are no longer accessible. We do know that something was flown out of Germany into Argentina. We know that. We know that Kammler survived, either taken by the Nazis or, by the CIA or allowed to flee, but not until he had given them what they were after. And I think that his capture or his surrender or whatever to the Americans directly, in my opinion, led to Operation High Jump. To put together a military operation of this magnitude, okay, to the Antarctic, to survey the Antarctic with 5,000 fighting men? What? I'm sorry, but I mean, if that doesn't bother you as a thing, it should, because it makes no sense. The Americans, and generally the world, had just been given a massive pummeling. We had just detonated 2 atomic bombs. The American Navy specifically had suffered fairly significant losses, men and material. The Allied forces had suffered significant losses. Europe was in tatters. Japan was in tatters. Large tracts of the world had disrupted supply lines. There was a lot of things that needed to be done in the aftermath of World War II. But the mapping and survey of the Antarctic, if they had gone to the North Pole, I would say, okay, I get it. And the reason I get it is because the North Pole connects the United States and the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, Dave. That makes sense. Okay, you want to go to the North Pole, find some islands, find some, maybe Canadian coastline where you can build bases or early warning listening posts or whatever. I go, okay, I dig it. That's cool. But there is nothing what connects via the South Pole is Argentina, South Africa, and Australia. Those are the closest land masses to the South Pole. There are no enemies in Argentina. There are no enemies in South Africa. There are no enemies in Australia that would concern the Americans in any way. Yet, that's where they sent those 5,000 men and 13 ships. Okay? In my opinion, it is because Kamala said something. Kamala said, yeah, guys, we got stuff there. I'm done with this. Just leave me be. Clearly, Nazi Germany didn't work out. Just let me go my way. And maybe they did. Maybe he committed suicide. I don't know. But the point is, I reckon, Dave, he told them something, and Operation High Jump was initiated because the bell was taken there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the only working bell. Maybe the only working
that makes
prototype.
sense.
Maybe. I don't know. Because look, everybody, and I apologize. A lot of conjecture here, but I think there's also a lot of evidence we have chewed through. Dave, what do you think, man?
Look, I agree. If you take all of this Kamala thing in isolation, he's reported to have died everywhere over a number of different days by different people who have motive to protect him, as maybe instructions. He might have simply swapped out his as a lot of high-ranking officials would have done, swapped for civilian gear and just pretended to be no one, but was rounded up eventually and divulged a bunch of info for freedom. Makes sense. He wasn't a technician that could have done anything else except for provide information. The fact that there isn't any of that available, even this amount of time after the war, is astonishing to me. There should have been something, unless, of course, all of that went to deep black projects.
Yeah.
And then it's never going to be mentioned. The whole planet would be cleansed of that information, as so the second of those freedom of information requests had determined the first one came up with stuff, the second one nothing. There was nothing there. They swept that clean. Someone bringing that information box to the front desk and said, "Hey boss, they were asking about Kamala, and look, this is what I found." Like, oh, good lord, really? Okay, we've already given them a bunch of stuff. Oh, okay. Well, let's just tell them none of this exist. What's that over there? And then when they looked over there, they made the box disappear. Right? Do you know what I mean? You can't have the work experience kid ruining it for everybody. And certainly not the military-industrial complex with their deep black projects. That's not going to happen. It isn't going to happen. That's why, Becky, why I think so strongly in agreement with you that high jump aligns really well with the outcomes of these interrogations and the personnel who were interrogated.
Yeah, because I mean, look, we've discussed this and we've had a show on this as well. Operation High Jump just makes no sense. I mean, as a thing, sure, you could do it at some point, but not when they did it. It doesn't. You know what I mean? It's just it's hard to swallow that they would concentrate their resources over there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that brings us to the end of show cycle.
Can you believe there's only a minute left?
Minute left, yeah, perfect. We made it, Dave. This has been a long one.
Crowd goes wild.
We'll see what we do next week, I guess.
Coming up next is Jeb's awesome show. I use 3 different vowel sounds then. Awesome show after hours. And do listen. Stay tuned for that. And check in next week for another Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mecky. Plus, during the week, we've got Plato's Cave at 7 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday and Thursday. Tune in then for us. Otherwise, stay safe.